Somewhere in the world, right now, there is a fan of The Simpsons who has watched every single episode of their favorite show, and they are wrong about that. There are 11 episodes the show has made over the last 36 years that they have almost certainly never seen, because 11 episodes have been pulled, banned, edited, or quietly erased from screens in different parts of the world, for reasons ranging from a real American tragedy, to a foreign government's anger, to a single uniform drawn into a single frame, to a color palette that happened to match the flag of an opposition party in a country most people could not point to on a map. Tonight, all of them are getting unpacked. Every banned episode, every reason, every detail. Welcome to Yellow Fan. Let's get started. Stark Raving Dad, the only episode The Simpsons banned from itself. There is one episode of The Simpsons that you cannot watch on Disney+. You cannot find it on any streaming service. You cannot buy it on a new DVD. The only way to see it now, in 2026, is to dig up an old physical copy from before 2019, or to find a bootleg version somewhere online. And the strange part is, this episode used to be one of the most loved episodes the show ever made. It was the season 3 premiere. It featured one of the biggest pop stars in human history. It ended with a song that has stayed in fans' heads for over 30 years. The episode is called Stark Raving Dad. It first aired on Fox on September 19th, 1991, and it is the only episode in the entire 36-year run of The Simpsons that was pulled from circulation by the people who made it. The plot is simple, and on paper, it sounds like a regular Simpsons episode from the golden years. Bart leaves his lucky red hat in the laundry. The red dye runs and turns all of Homer's white work shirts pink. Homer is forced to wear a pink shirt to the nuclear power plant. Mr. Burns spots him, and because nobody else at the plant is wearing pink, Burns decides Homer must be some kind of free-thinking troublemaker. He sends Homer home with a mental health quiz to fill out. Homer is too lazy to do it himself, so he tells Bart to fill it out for him. Bart, being Bart, ticks every single box without reading any of the questions. Homer turns the quiz in. The quiz comes back saying he is insane. He is taken away to a mental hospital. That is the setup. The real story begins inside the hospital. Homer is given a roommate. The roommate is a large, heavy-set, bald white man. The man speaks in a soft, gentle voice, and the man tells Homer that he is, in fact, Michael Jackson. Homer, who has somehow never heard a Michael Jackson song in his life, believes him completely. The two of them become friends. By the end of the episode, Homer brings the man home with him. Bart hears about this and tells the entire town that Michael Jackson is coming to his house. The whole of Springfield gathers in the Simpson family yard. When the man steps out, he is bald and large and clearly not the real Michael Jackson, and the town walks away angry. But the man stays for one more night. He helps Bart write a birthday song for Lisa, because Bart has forgotten her birthday yet again. The song is called Happy Birthday Lisa. It is one of the most touching moments the show ever produced. And then the man reveals his real name. He is Leon Kompowski. He is a bricklayer from New Jersey. He is not Michael Jackson, and he never was. He just found that when he spoke in Michael Jackson's voice, he could make people happy. He drives off into the night. The episode ends. Here is what made the episode famous, and what eventually made it untouchable. The voice of Leon Kompowski was performed by the real Michael Jackson. This was kept a secret for years. Michael Jackson was a huge fan of The Simpsons. He called Matt Groening one night and offered to do a guest appearance on the show. Groening said yes. The script was written by Al Jean and Mike Reiss, based on an idea pitched by James L. Brooks. Jackson came to the recording session alone. He pitched several of his own ideas for the script. He even asked that a joke about the singer Prince be changed to one about Elvis Presley instead. But Jackson's record label would not let him be officially credited on the show, so in the closing credits, the voice of Leon Kompowski was listed as being performed by a man named John J. Smith. That name was fake. For years, fans whispered that it was really Michael Jackson, but it was not officially confirmed for a long time. There was also one strange catch. Jackson recorded the speaking voice for the character, But when the character sings Happy Birthday Lisa at the end, that singing voice is not Jackson. Because of contract issues, the producers had to use a sound-alike singer named Kip Lennon for the song. So the most emotional moment of the episode, the part everyone remembers most, was not even Jackson's real singing voice. It was somebody else doing an impression. For nearly 3 decades, none of this was a problem. The episode was beloved. It won awards. It was praised by critics. It sat in the Simpsons DVD box sets and aired in syndication around the world. Fans considered it one of the best episodes of the early seasons. There were rumors and accusations against Michael Jackson during his lifetime. He was investigated in 1993, he was tried in 2005, and found not guilty. The Simpsons producers later said that Jackson's 2005 trial result was the reason they had not removed the episode earlier. They believed at the time that he was innocent. Then, in March 2019, HBO released a documentary called Leaving Neverland. The documentary featured 2 men, Wade Robson and James Safechuck, who said in long, detailed interviews that Jackson had abused them when they were children. The documentary was 4 hours long. It was painful to watch. It changed a lot of minds, and it changed the minds of the people running The Simpsons. James L. Brooks, the executive producer who had originally pitched the Stark Raving Dad story idea, watched the documentary. He spoke with Matt Groening. He spoke with Al Jean. The 3 of them agreed on what to do. Brooks called the Wall Street Journal and made the announcement. They were pulling Stark Raving Dad from everything, forever. It would be removed from television syndication, removed from the FXX streaming service that hosted every episode of the show, and it would not be included on any future DVD or Blu-ray release. They started the removal process the same week. The way Brooks explained it became one of the most quoted lines in the entire story. He said it was a treasured episode. He said there were many great memories tied up in it. He said pulling it did not feel good. But then he said something that summed up the whole situation. He said, "I am against book burning of any kind, but this is our book, and we are allowed to take out a chapter." That sentence is doing a lot of work. Brooks is admitting that he does not believe in erasing things from history. He is admitting that the episode itself is not the problem. But he is also drawing a clear line. The Simpsons is his work, his team's work, and they have the right to decide what stays in their own collection. The episode was not banned by any government. It was not banned by Disney. It was not banned by Fox. It was banned by the people who made it. The decision was carried out fully. When the Season 3 DVD was reprinted, Stark Raving Dad was removed entirely. The DVD now starts with the 2nd episode of the season, called Mr. Lisa Goes to Washington. New fans who buy the box set today never see Stark Raving Dad at all. They might not even know the episode existed unless they go looking for it. When Disney Plus launched and added every Simpsons episode to its library, this was the only episode left out. There are over 700 Simpsons episodes on Disney Plus. Stark Raving Dad is the missing one. Years later, Al Jean, who co-wrote the episode, took the decision even further in a public interview. He said something that shocked even some of his fellow writers. Jean said he believed that being on The Simpsons was part of how Jackson built up his image as a friend to children. He said the cartoon connection was, in his words, part of what Jackson used to groom boys. Gene was careful to say he could not prove it personally, but he said that was what he believed. And he said the possibility was enough to make him support keeping the episode buried forever. Some fans pushed back hard against the decision. There are still people online who argue the episode should be brought back. They say it is great work. They say Michael Jackson's voice is barely the focus of the episode. They say the song Happy Birthday Lisa is not even Jackson singing. They say burying art does not undo harm. Brooks himself said he understood the argument. He said he was against book burning of any kind, but he also also said, "This is our book." There are a few small details from this whole story that make it stranger. The episode was originally going to end with Leon Kompowski singing a portion of Michael Jackson's actual song, Man in the Mirror. The producers changed the ending to the original Happy Birthday Lisa song instead. Stark Raving Dad was the very last episode produced for Season 2 of the show, but it was held back and aired as the Season 3 premiere over a year after it was finished. The episode also became famous for a completely separate reason. In 1992, it was rerun with a special opening that responded to a real speech made by then-President George H.W. Bush, who had said that American families should be more like the Waltons and less like the Simpsons. The show fired back in the rerun with a joke aimed straight at the president. None of this matters to the band. It just shows how deep the episode is woven into the show's history. Pulling it left a hole that nothing else can fill. What makes the Stark Raving Dad story stand out from every other banned Simpsons episode is the source of the ban. Almost every other case on this list will involve a country, a government, a network, or a streaming service deciding to block the episode. Stark Raving Dad is the only one where the people who made the show looked at their own work and decided to take it off the shelf themselves. Not because someone forced them, not because a country complained, not because a network demanded it. Because three men, Brooks and Groening and Gene, watched a documentary and decided they could not, in good conscience, keep that episode in their library anymore. The episode lives on in a strange half-life. Old DVDs from before 2019 still have it. Some fans on the internet share it through unofficial channels. The song Happy Birthday Lisa still floats around YouTube, often without context, often without people knowing where it came from. New Simpsons viewers may go their entire lives without ever seeing the episode. They might watch every other episode on Disney+, season after season, and never realize there is a missing one. The third season just begins with a different episode now. Most people never notice. When the Michael Jackson biopic film Michael was released, the conversation around Stark Raving Dad came back into the news again. People online started asking why they could not find the episode anymore. New fans discovered, sometimes for the first time, that the show they had grown up loving had a hidden chapter that had been quietly erased while they were not looking. And they discovered that the people who erased it were the people they had trusted to tell them the story in the first place. That is what makes Stark Raving Dad such a strange case. Almost every other banned episode is a story about someone outside the show pushing back against what The Simpsons said. This one is the opposite. This is the story of The Simpsons pushing back against itself. It is the show looking at one of its own beloved episodes and saying, "This one cannot stay." The pulling of Stark Raving Dad was, in a way, the cleanest ban in the show's history. There was no court case, no government order, no network notes, no fight. Just three men agreeing, after watching a documentary together, that something needed to be quietly removed from the world. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Most of the other bands in the show's long history did not come from the inside. They came from the outside, from governments, from angry citizens, from entire countries. And the next case is the most dramatic example of that. It involves a real American tragedy that 4 years before it happened, the show had already turned into the entire backdrop of an episode. When that tragedy actually arrived, every shot of those buildings, every joke set inside them, every line of dialogue suddenly became something nobody could bear to watch. And what the show did about it, and what got cut out forever, is something most fans today have no idea ever even existed. Section 2. The City of New York versus Homer Simpson, the episode 9/11 Erased. On September 21st, 1997, The Simpsons aired the Season 9 premiere. The episode was called The City of New York vs. Homer Simpson. It ran for about 22 minutes. It was reviewed well. It won an Emmy. It introduced a character who would go on to become a fan favorite for the next 30 years. By every measure of the time, it was a complete success. 4 years later, almost to the day, the episode quietly disappeared from television. The plot of the episode is one of the simplest setups the show ever attempted. Barney Gumble, the lovable drunk who hangs around Moe's Tavern, is forced to be the designated driver one night for Homer and the rest of the gang. The choice destroys Barney. He is so used to drinking that staying sober for one night drives him to a complete mental breakdown. He drives Homer's car off into the night and disappears. Months pass. Eventually, Barney comes back to Moe's with no memory of where the car went. Then a letter arrives at the Simpson home. The car has been found. It has been parked illegally in downtown Manhattan, stuck in the plaza right between two specific buildings for months. It has racked up a mountain of parking tickets. It has a metal boot clamped on the wheel. If Homer does not come and pick it up within 72 hours, the city will destroy it. Homer hates New York. He has hated it ever since a bad trip he took there as a teenager. But the family pushes him to go. So the Simpsons fly to Manhattan. Marge and the kids go off to see the sights. Homer goes alone to fetch the car. The car is sitting in the plaza of the World Trade Center. That is where the trouble starts. And that is where the trouble would later end. Homer arrives at the plaza and finds his car covered in tickets. He calls the number on the boot. The voice on the line tells him that an officer will come to remove the boot, but only between certain hours, and that Homer must wait by the car the entire time. So Homer waits. He drinks too much crab juice from a street vendor. He needs to use the bathroom badly. He cannot leave the car. He tries everything. Eventually, desperate, he sprints into the South Tower, races up to the observation deck, finds the bathroom there is broken, runs back down, sprints over to the North Tower, climbs all the way up, and finally relieves himself in the bathroom at the top. The whole sequence is one of the most physical, frantic gags the show had attempted at that point. The animators had been sent on a real research trip to New York. They had taken hundreds of photographs of the city, the streets, the towers, the elevators, even the inside of the buildings. The whole thing was drawn to look as close to the real place as the show could possibly get it. While Homer is panicking inside the towers, the rest of the family is having a much better time. Marge takes Bart, Lisa, and baby Maggie around the city. They go to a Broadway musical called Kicking It, a parody of stories about celebrities going to rehab, which features the song You're Checkin' In. That song would later win the Emmy for Outstanding Original Music and Lyrics. They visit the offices of Mad Magazine. They eat, they sightsee. They mistake a group of religious Jewish men for the band ZZ Top. The whole episode plays New York as a chaotic but secretly charming place that Homer is too closed-minded to enjoy. The episode also gave the show a brand new character. In one short scene, Homer sees a dancing, flexing, beer-promoting mascot at a stadium event. The mascot calls himself Duff Man. This was the first time the character ever appeared. Duff Man would become a recurring fan favorite for decades. Then, there is one specific moment in the episode that became impossible to talk about for years afterward. While Homer is stuck waiting by his car in the plaza, he gets into a shouting match with someone leaning out of a window high up in Tower 2. A second person, also leaning out of a window in Tower 1, joins the argument. The man in Tower 2, sick of the man in Tower 1, shouts a single line back across the plaza. He yells that they stick all the jerks in Tower 1. It was meant as a small throwaway joke about office buildings and the kind of people who work in them. In 1997, it landed as nothing more than that, Just a quick gag in a long episode full of quick gags. The line aired, people laughed, the show moved on. The next week, a new episode aired. Nobody thought about it again. Then 4 years passed. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, 2 airplanes were flown into the World Trade Center towers. Both buildings collapsed. Thousands of people died. America froze. Television networks stopped airing certain shows, certain movies, certain music videos, anything that featured the towers in any prominent way. Films like Spider-Man pulled their trailers. TV shows quietly removed their skyline shots. Anything that showed the towers in a comedic light was the most sensitive of all. The Simpsons had a problem. The city of New York versus Homer Simpson did not just feature the towers in the background. The towers were the location. They were the setting. They were the place where half the episode took place. Homer ran into the South Tower. Homer ran out of it. Homer raced into the North Tower. Homer ran out of that one too. The plaza between them was where his car sat for the whole episode. There was no way to remove the towers from the episode without removing the episode itself. So Fox pulled it. The episode was taken off syndication across most of America. For around 5 years, it simply stopped airing. Local stations that had been running it on rotation took it out of their schedules. It was not officially banned by any government, and there was no public press conference about the decision. It just vanished. Most fans noticed it was gone. Some fans noticed it was gone and understood why immediately. Others were confused. Either way, the episode disappeared from American television for a long time. In some other countries, the story was different. Australia kept airing the episode largely uncut on cable channels for years. Canada also kept it in regular rotation on its main networks. The complete Season 9 DVD was released uncut, so fans who owned the physical disc still had the original version. But on American TV, where most people watched the show, it was gone. Around 2006, the episode slowly began returning to syndication. By that point, around 5 years had passed since the attacks. Some networks felt enough time had gone by. But when the episode came back, it did not come back the same. It came back changed. Every exterior shot of the towers, the wide pans showing the buildings rising over the city, was cut. The argument scene between the man in Tower 2 and the man in Tower 1 was edited. The line about how they stick all the jerks in Tower 1 was removed. Homer's frantic dash from one tower to the other was trimmed in places. The version most American viewers saw from 2006 onward was not the same episode that aired in 1997. It was shorter. It was missing pieces. It had been cleaned up to make the towers fade into the background as much as possible. Bill Oakley, who had been one of the showrunners who oversaw the original episode, was asked about that line years later. He had been the one who originally suggested setting the car at the World Trade Center Plaza. He had been the one who signed off on the script. When asked about the joke about Tower 1, he gave a one-word answer that captured how he felt. He called the line, in his own word, regrettable. The episode sits in a strange place now. On the Disney Plus streaming service, the original uncut version is finally available again. On most reruns, the edited version is what plays. Some fans have spent years collecting the different versions, comparing the cuts, trying to track exactly what was removed and when. The complete Season 9 DVD set still has the original. So the show was never fully erased. It just lived in different forms in different places depending on who was watching. There is one detail from the episode that gave it a strange second life. While Marge and the kids are walking around New York, they pass a brochure or sign that advertises a bus fare for $9. The number 9 is shown big on the brochure. Behind the 9, the artist had drawn a small silhouette of the New York skyline, which prominently featured the two towers. When you put the $sign and the 9 and the towers together, the image looks something like the number 9 next to two ones. It looks, to some eyes, like 9 and 11. After September 11th, 2001, fans started circulating screenshots of this image. A wave of conspiracy theories grew online. People claimed The Simpsons had predicted 9/11 4 years in advance. The producers had hidden a secret message in the episode. The artists had known something. The whole thing was a clue. Bill Oakley addressed this directly years later. He said the $9 was picked because it was a comically cheap fare. He said when the artist drew the brochure, the artist had logically picked a silhouette of New York City to put behind the number, and the towers were obviously part of any New York skyline. Oakley said he signed off on the design. He said it was simple. He said it was self-explanatory. But he also admitted that, given the episode was the only episode of any TV show ever to have an entire act of jokes set inside the World Trade Center, the coincidence was, in his words, eerie. Al Jean, the longtime showrunner, agreed. He said in an interview that there is a frame where there is a brochure that says New York at $9 a day, and behind the 9, the Twin Towers are drawn so they look like an 11. He said the coincidence was completely bizarre and strange. But he made it clear it was just a coincidence. The episode was not a prediction. It was just a comedy from 1997 that history happened to land on top of. There is one more part of the story that stands out. In 2019, 18 years after the attacks, the producers of The Simpsons donated something to the National September 11th Memorial and Museum in New York. It was a hand-drawn animation cell from the original episode. The cell showed the two towers, drawn in the show's bright cartoon style, standing tall in the plaza where Homer's car had been parked. The curator of the museum, when asked about the donation, called it hilarious and tender. The same image of the towers that had once made the episode unwatchable for years was now hanging in a museum dedicated to remembering them. The episode itself has never fully recovered its old place in the show's library, even though it is now technically available again. Even though the original cut is on Disney+, the episode is still one of the most rarely played in syndication. Many local networks simply skip it. They go from the Season 8 finale straight into the second episode of Season 9. Most people who grew up watching the show only on TV reruns may have only seen it once or twice in their entire lives, if at all. What makes the city of New York versus Homer Simpson such an important case is the kind of ban it represents. The episode was not pulled because it was offensive. It was not pulled because the writers had done something wrong. It was not pulled because anyone in the show had hurt anyone. It was pulled because the world changed underneath it. A perfectly normal 22-minute comedy from 1997, written and animated and aired without a single problem, became something nobody could bear to watch in 2001, simply because reality had moved. This kind of ban is the most haunting kind. It cannot be predicted. It cannot be planned for. The writers did not know what was coming. The animators did not know what was coming. The voice actors did not know what was coming. They had simply made a comedy about a man stuck waiting for a parking officer at the foot of two big buildings. And then, 4 years later, those two big buildings were not there anymore, and the episode they had made could no longer exist in the world the way it had been made. The Stark Raving Dad case was the show pulling itself off the shelf. This case was the world reaching up and pulling the show off the shelf instead. Two completely different reasons, two completely different decisions, both ending in the same place. An episode that millions of fans had once seen, suddenly missing. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Not every banned Simpsons episode disappeared because of a tragedy nobody saw coming. Some of them disappeared because an entire country decided, very loudly and very publicly, that they did not like the way they had been drawn. The next case is the one where a real-life nation with a real-life president threatened to take the Simpsons to court. The country tried to sue Fox. The president of that country said the show had distorted reality, and the show responded with a joke that made the whole situation worse. Section 3. Blame It on Lisa. When Brazil tried to sue The Simpsons. On March 31st, 2002, The Simpsons aired the 15th episode of its 13th season. The episode was called Blame It on Lisa. It was watched by around 11 million people in America that night. The reviews back home were mostly positive. People laughed, people moved on. The next week, a new episode came out, and the show kept rolling along like it always had. Then the Brazilian government got involved. Within a week of the episode airing, the Tourist Board of Rio de Janeiro was preparing to sue 20th Century Fox. The president of Brazil, a man named Fernando Henrique Cardoso, gave a public statement saying the show had brought a distorted vision of Brazilian reality to the world. Newspapers in Brazil were running daily articles about the episode. The American producers found themselves in the middle of an actual international incident, and the response from the Simpsons team made the whole thing even worse. The setup of the episode was harmless on paper. Marge gets a phone bill in the mail. There is a $400 charge on it for long-distance calls to Brazil. She is furious. After some shouting, Lisa admits she was the one making the calls. She has been sponsoring an orphan boy in Rio de Janeiro. His name is Ronaldo. She had been getting monthly letters from him, but the letters had stopped coming. So she had called the orphanage to find out what happened. The orphanage told her Ronaldo had gone missing. Lisa shows the family a videotape Ronaldo had sent her after her first donation. In the tape, Ronaldo cheerfully tells her that he used the money she sent to buy a pair of dancing shoes for himself. Lisa is heartbroken that he might be in danger, so the family decides to fly to Brazil and find him. That is where the trouble began. The moment the family arrived in Rio de Janeiro, the show stopped being a story about a boy and started being a tour through every bad cliché the writers could think of about Brazil. The Simpsons land in Rio. They follow a long conga line through the streets to get anywhere. They are robbed by a group of street kids in the middle of the day. They visit the slums of the city, drawn as colorful but completely overrun with rats. The orphanage they visit is filthy. The streets are full of monkeys, swinging through the city like Rio is some kind of jungle. They watch a Brazilian children's TV show, where a parody version of a real Brazilian children's host named Xuxa dances around in a way that is meant to look far too suggestive for a kids' program. They eat at a restaurant where everything is impossibly spicy. Then Homer gets into a taxi. The taxi driver and his partner kidnap him. They drag him deep into the rainforest. They tie him up. They demand the family pay $50,000 to get him back. The plot turns into a hostage drama set against the Amazon. While Homer is being held captive, the rest of the family wanders through Rio looking for a way to save him. They eventually run into Ronaldo, completely by accident, dancing on a parade float during Carnival. He is wearing a giant pink flamingo costume. He explains that the dance shoes Lisa bought him got him a paying job, and now he has plenty of money, and he gives the family the cash to pay Homer's ransom. The kidnappers and the family meet on two separate cable cars to do the exchange high above the city. The cable snaps. The Simpsons fall down a mountainside. They survive. They walk away. And then, in the very last shot of the episode, Bart is swallowed whole by a giant snake. The episode ends with Bart inside the snake, dancing along to a carnival song. That is the whole episode. To American viewers, it was just another episode of The Simpsons going on vacation, like the show had done 100 times before. The show had visited Australia. It had visited Japan. It had visited many countries and made jokes about all of them. But Brazil, specifically the leadership of Rio de Janeiro, did not see this one as a joke. Rio de Janeiro, at that exact moment in 2002, was running a massive tourism campaign. The city had spent millions of dollars over the previous 3 years trying to convince the world that Rio was a beautiful, safe, modern city that visitors should come and see. The whole campaign was built on changing the image of Rio away from old stereotypes about crime, poverty, and chaos. Then The Simpsons aired an episode that, in the eyes of the Brazilian tourism industry, undid all of that work in 22 minutes. The tourist board, called Rio Tour, was led at the time by a man named Jose Eduardo Guinle. He was furious. He held public statements. He told reporters that the depiction of his city in the episode was unacceptable. He spoke to a rioter spokesman named Sergio Cavalcanti, who told the news agency Reuters what bothered the board most. It was the monkeys swinging everywhere. The image of Rio de Janeiro as a jungle. Cavalcanti said in plain words that the monkey image was what really hurt. Brazilian audiences, he said, could see the show was trying to draw their city as a wild, untamed, animal-filled place, and that was the deepest insult of all. Rioter asked its legal team to look into suing Fox. The Brazilian government got behind them. President Cardoso, the most powerful person in the country, publicly supported the action. He said the episode brought a distorted vision of Brazilian reality. The Brazilian media ran with the story for days. Editorials were written. News programs ran segments. The episode that had just played as a normal vacation comedy in America had, in Brazil, become a national insult. The producers of The Simpsons were caught completely off guard. Al Jean, the showrunner, said later in interviews that the team had no idea this was coming. He explained that every other place the show had visited had taken the jokes in good humor. Australia laughed it off. Japan dealt with it. England rolled with it. But Brazil, in his words, caught them by surprise. James L. Brooks, the executive producer who had, by this point, been the public voice of The Simpsons for over a decade, decided to issue a formal apology. He spoke for the show. The apology came in 2 parts. The first part was a normal, polite statement. He said, in clear words, "We apologize to the lovely city and people of Rio de Janeiro." That should have been the end of it, but the apology did not stop there. Brooks added one more sentence. The sentence was a joke. He said that if his apology did not settle the issue, then Homer Simpson was willing to take on the president of Brazil in a celebrity boxing match on Fox. The joke landed badly. Brazilian officials were not amused. The governments and tourism boards involved did not see the funny side. The American producers had managed to apologize and insult the country in the same breath. The lawsuit threats continued for a while. Eventually, the Brazilian legal team learned something important. They learned that the First Amendment to the United States Constitution protects parody as a form of free speech. A satirical cartoon making fun of a foreign country, even unfairly, was almost impossible to sue over in American courts. The lawsuit was quietly dropped. But the episode itself paid the price. Blame It on Lisa was effectively banned from airing in Brazil. The episode did not appear on Brazilian television for years. When the episode was eventually finally allowed to air there in December 2002, it came with a special note added at the very beginning. The note told viewers that Fox was not responsible for the views and opinions of the producers behind the episode. The Brazilian networks made a public point of distancing themselves from what was about to be shown. Even years after the lawsuit threat had faded, Blame It on Lisa was rarely played anywhere. It was considered one of the most controversial episodes in the show's catalog. The episode would not run uncensored in Brazil until 2012, a full 10 years after it first aired. Eventually, it was added to the Brazilian DVD release. But the damage to the show's reputation in the country lasted for a long time. The Simpsons writers themselves, however, did not let the controversy go quietly. They turned it into a running joke. In a season 15 episode called The Regina Monologues, where the family travels to England, Homer makes an offhand reference to the monkey problem getting worse in Rio. In a different episode, called Mr. Spritz Goes to Washington, Krusty the Clown reveals that his monkey sidekick, Mr. Teeny, came from Brazil. He even adds a line about how Mr. Teeny's uncle was the head monkey on the Bureau of Tourism. The writers were openly mocking the very complaint that had nearly gotten them sued. The complaint had been about monkeys, and the writers responded by working monkey jokes about Brazil into multiple later episodes. Even more telling was a moment in the season 18 episode, The Wife Aquatic. The family visits a small island that has been ruined by overfishing. Lisa says, looking at the wreckage of the place, that this is the most disgusting place they have ever gone. Bart corrects her. He asks, "What about Brazil?" Lisa pauses. Then she agrees. She says, "After Brazil." The show had officially folded the controversy into its own canon. Brazil was now, in the world of The Simpsons, the worst place the family had ever been. The Brazil situation did, eventually, get a quiet ending. 12 years after the original episode, in 2014, The Simpsons returned to Brazil. The episode was called You Don't Have to Live Like a Referee. It came out in time with the real-life FIFA World Cup, which was being held in Brazil that year. Homer is recruited as a referee by FIFA. He brings the family along. The episode again pokes fun at Brazil, but this time with much more care. It mocks the world of professional soccer. It makes jokes about the cost of the World Cup. It pokes fun at FIFA's many corruption scandals. But it also takes time to show Rio de Janeiro as a beautiful place. It shows the famous statue of Christ the Redeemer. It shows the energy of the crowds. It shows real Brazilian football culture with real respect. The episode even includes a callback line, where one of the characters mentions that the family had been here before, the implication being that this trip was meant to make up for the last one. The original Blame It on Lisa episode is still considered one of the lowest moments in The Simpsons' later seasons. Many fans agree that the show, at the time, was past its golden years. The episode came out in season 13, well after the era when the show was at its sharpest. The jokes were broader, the cultural references were lazier. The writers had even made a basic mistake by having Bart try to learn Spanish in preparation for the trip, only to have Marge correct him by reminding him that Brazilians actually speak Portuguese. That gag was meant as a clever moment in the episode, but it also accidentally captured the deeper problem. The writers themselves had to research basic facts about Brazil mid-script. They were making an episode about a country they barely knew, and it showed in every frame. What makes the Blame It on Lisa case stand out is the scale of the response. This was not just a country complaining. This was a real foreign president, a real tourism board, a real legal team, and a real attempt to drag a Hollywood cartoon into court for damaging a city's image. The Simpsons had stumbled into a real diplomatic problem. And the joke they made in their apology, the celebrity boxing match line, became one of the most replayed quotes from the entire situation. It captured something true about The Simpsons in this era of the show. The writers could no longer tell, in the moment, when they had crossed a line. They thought everyone was still in on the joke. They were wrong. The episode now sits in the show's history as a warning. It is the case that proves the show could not always control where its humor would land once it left American shores. Sometimes a quick joke about a foreign country, written by someone who had never been there, would set off a chain reaction that the writers never saw coming. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Some of those chain reactions, though, were not about jokes at all. Some of them were about a single image drawn into a single scene with a single character wearing a single uniform from a real moment in history. And in one country in Europe, that single image was enough to keep one of the most beloved episodes of The Simpsons off the air for years. The episode in question is widely called the greatest episode the show ever made, and the country that banned it had laws on the books that left the network with no choice. Section 4, Cape Fear. Why Germany banned the greatest episode. Ask any longtime fan of The Simpsons to name the greatest episode the show ever made, and you will hear the same handful of titles come up over and over again. There is Marge versus the Monorail. There is You Only Move Twice. There is Last Exit to Springfield. And there is, almost without fail, Cape Fear. The episode is held up as one of the finest pieces of comedy writing the show ever produced. It is the one with the rakes. It is the one with the witness protection program. It is the one where Sideshow Bob, after years of being beaten and humiliated by a 10-year-old boy, finally gets close enough to actually do something about it. Cape Fear aired on October 7th, 1993. It was the second episode of Season 5, and in Germany, for years, large sections of the country could not legally watch it the way it had been made. The episode opens with Bart receiving a series of disturbing letters in the mail. The letters are written in an angry scrawl. They threaten his life. They are signed by someone who promises to kill him. Bart shows the letters to his family. The family eventually figures out who they are from. They are from Sideshow Bob. Sideshow Bob was once a sidekick on Krusty the Clown's TV show, before turning to a life of crime. He has been chased by Bart in episode after episode. He has been thrown in prison. He has been let out. He has been thrown back in. And now, after his most recent release on parole, he is coming for Bart. The Simpson family panics. They go to the police. The police are not helpful, so the family is enrolled in the Witness Protection Program. They are given new identities, new clothes, and a new town to live in. Their new last name is Thompson. Their new home is a houseboat on a place called Terror Lake. The whole setup is a parody of the 1991 film Cape Fear, which was directed by Martin Scorsese and starred Robert De Niro. In that film, a violent ex-prisoner stalks a family who are also forced to retreat to a houseboat on a lake to escape him. The Simpsons took the entire premise of that movie, swapped Robert De Niro's character for Sideshow Bob, and rebuilt the whole thing as a comedy. The episode is filled with some of the most replayed jokes in the show's history. There is the long sequence where Sideshow Bob, hiding under the Simpsons family car, gets dragged behind it for hundreds of miles down the highway, hitting every pothole and bump in the road. There is the scene where Bob, sneaking up on the family at night, steps on a single rake hidden in the grass, and the handle flies up and smacks him in the face. Then he steps on another rake, then another, then another. The same gag repeats 9 times in a row, each rake making the same dull thumping sound. Many comedy writers consider that single sequence one of the bravest jokes ever written for animation, because it kept going long after most viewers thought it was finished, and that was exactly what made it land. There is the moment near the end where Bart, trapped on the houseboat with Sideshow Bob, tricks his enemy into singing the entire score of the Gilbert and Sullivan musical HMS Pinafore. Bob sings every single song. The houseboat drifts down the river while he performs. By the time the family floats safely back into into a populated area where police are waiting, Bob has just finished his big closing number and is taking a bow. He is arrested mid-applause. Most fans rank the episode as a near-perfect 22 minutes of television. The pacing is tight, the jokes never let up. Sideshow Bob, voiced by the actor Kelsey Grammer, gives one of the most memorable performances of the entire series. The animation is detailed, the music is theatrical. There is almost nothing in the episode that does not work. But there were two things in the episode that, when it eventually arrived in Germany, made the country's broadcasters refuse to air it the way it was originally made. The first thing was simple. The plot of Cape Fear, at its core, is about an adult man with a knife trying to murder a 10-year-old boy. Most of the show's audience saw this for what it was, which was an exaggerated, loud, ridiculous parody of a horror film. The threat is comic. Bart is never really in danger. The episode plays the whole stalking story for laughs. But on paper, when stripped of context, the description is heavy. Sideshow Bob spends the entire second half of the episode openly trying to kill a child. He chases Bart. He corners Bart. He grabs Bart. He tells Bart plainly that he is going to kill him. The houseboat sequence ends with Bob holding a knife to Bart's throat. German broadcasting standards have very strict rules about depicting violence aimed at children, even in a cartoon. The fact that the show is a comedy does not always make a difference under those rules. The image of a grown man holding a knife to a child's neck, even when the child is a yellow cartoon, was a problem. The second thing was much more specific, and it was the part that became the real reason the episode was banned. There's a moment in Cape Fear where, on the family's TV set at home, a fictional fake show is playing. The fictional show is called Up Late with McBain. McBain is a recurring character in The Simpsons, a parody of action film stars from the 1980s. In the scene, the camera pulls back to show the announcer for this fictional late-night show. The announcer is wearing a uniform. The uniform is a real one, and it comes from a real moment in human history. The announcer is dressed as a member of the Nazi SS. Specifically, the uniform is meant to represent the rank of Obergruppenführer, which was a senior Nazi paramilitary rank used during the Second World War. It was a quick gag, a single visual joke, played out in just a few seconds of screen time. The point of the joke is fast and loose. The Simpsons writers loved using shocking, out-of-place imagery in the background of jokes. This was one of those moments. The uniform was not the focus of the scene. It was just a quick visual sight gag that flickered across the screen and was gone. But in Germany, those few seconds were enough to break the law. Germany has some of the strictest laws in the world about Nazi imagery and symbols. The reasons go back to the country's painful history with the Second World War and the Holocaust. After the war ended, the German government wrote laws into the constitution that made the public display of Nazi flags, salutes, ranks, and uniforms illegal. The only exceptions allowed were for educational purposes, historical documentaries, news reporting, art, or research. A funny cartoon making a quick visual joke did not fall under any of those exceptions. Showing a Nazi uniform on a comedy program, even just for a few seconds, even as part of a joke, even on a cartoon, could be considered a violation of those laws. Networks that broadcast such an image could face fines. The people responsible could face legal trouble. So when Cape Fear was prepared for German broadcast, the German networks looked at the episode and saw a problem they could not air around. The Nazi uniform was visible on screen in a fictional comedy show within the show. The violence against a child was prominent in the second half. Both elements together made the episode impossible to broadcast in its original form. The German networks made the decision to keep the episode off the air. For years, German fans of The Simpsons could not watch one of the most acclaimed episodes the show had ever made. The rest of the world, in country after country, was hailing Cape Fear as one of the finest things the show had produced. In Germany, the episode was simply missing from the schedule. Eventually, German broadcasters worked out a compromise. The episode was edited. The Nazi uniform scene was carefully altered so that the offending uniform was either covered up, replaced with something else, or cut from the broadcast version entirely. The scene was modified in a way that met German legal standards. The violence against Bart was also handled with more care, often shortened or trimmed in places. The edited version of the episode eventually made it onto German television, but the original cut, the version the writers had made, the version every other country had been watching for years, was not allowed. The Cape Fear situation reveals something important about how country-level bans work in the modern world. The German networks did not ban the episode because they hated it. They did not ban it because they thought it was bad television. They did not ban it because of the violence alone, even though the violence against a child played a role. They banned it because of one specific image in one specific frame that violated one specific law. The law had not been written for The Simpsons. It had been written decades earlier, after a war, by a country trying to make sure its darkest history was not turned into entertainment. The Simpsons writers, working in California in 1993, had no real awareness that their quick visual joke would run into a German law that had been on the books since the late 1940s. They drew a uniform for a sight gag, and that sight gag became the reason an entire country could not legally see the episode. The story also reveals something about the writers themselves. The Simpsons in the early 1990s had a particular comedy style that loved to drop unexpected, dark, historically loaded images into the middle of cheerful gags. McBain himself, the parody character, was used over and over to make jokes about violent action movies, foreign politics, and Cold War tropes. The Nazi announcer was meant to be one of those quick, surreal gags. The writers were not trying to make any serious point about Nazis. They were not trying to glorify the uniform. They were just using shocking imagery for laughs, the way the show often did. But they were working in a country where that kind of shock was easy to print. In a country where that history was still a fresh wound, the same image could not just be printed without consequence. What makes the Cape Fear ban so striking is that, unlike many of the other bans in this list, it was not lifted because the world changed. The German laws about Nazi imagery have not changed. They are still in place today. The original, unedited Cape Fear is still not freely broadcast on German television in its raw form. The version that does air is the modified version. The original cut exists, of course. It is in the Season 5 DVD set. It is on streaming services in most other parts of the world. But for German viewers, the version of one of the show's greatest episodes is still, all these years later, slightly different from the version everyone else has seen. Some fans have made the argument that this kind of editing softens the joke. The Nazi uniform gag was meant to be jarring. It was meant to feel out of place. Removing it changes the rhythm of the scene, even if only slightly. But this is the trade-off. The episode lives in Germany, but it lives in a slightly cleaner version. Every country has its own version of the episode, depending on what its laws allow. Cape Fear, in that sense, is not one episode, but many. There is the American version, there is the British version, there is the Australian version, there is the Brazilian version, and then there is the German version, with the uniform handled differently, the laws of the country reaching back into the cartoon and quietly reshaping it. The strangest thing about all of this is how small the original cause of the ban actually was. A few seconds of screen time, a single uniform, one quick visual gag in an episode packed with hundreds of jokes. That was enough to lock one of the show's greatest episodes out of an entire country for years. It was a reminder that, in animation, every single frame matters. The artists who draw a quick background gag in California can, without ever knowing it, draw a frame that will trigger a national broadcast law on the other side of the world. Cape Fear became a strange test case for how cartoons travel. The episode was loved everywhere. It was banned in Germany. It was edited. It came back in a different form. And the fans who really loved the show learned, through cases like this, that the cartoon they grew up watching was not the same cartoon for everyone in the world. Each country had its own slightly trimmed, slightly altered version. Germany's version of Cape Fear was just one example. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But not every ban came from old laws written after a war. Some of them came from much more recent fears. Some of them came from the very real worry that a single joke on a cartoon broadcast at the wrong moment might actually push some viewer to do something dangerous in real life. And there is one episode where that fear was so strong that an entire country, with one of the most famous broadcasting networks in the world, refused to let it air for years. The episode involves a soccer riot, a gun store, and a recent national tragedy that made the whole story impossible to broadcast at the time it was meant to debut. Section 5. The Cartridge Family. The Gun Episode. Britain refused to air. On November 2nd, 1997, The Simpsons aired the 6th episode of Season 9. The episode was called The Cartridge Family. It was written by John Swartzwelder, one of the most respected writers in the show's entire history. The episode took on something the show had never seriously tackled before, and would only ever really tackle this one time. The subject was guns. Specifically, the question of what happens when someone like Homer Simpson decides he needs to buy one. In America, the episode aired without any major issues. About 10 million households watched it the night it premiered. Some critics praised it, some criticized it. The real National Rifle Association, the famous gun rights organization, sent in complaints about how they had been drawn in the show. The episode finished as the third highest rated show on the Fox network that week. Then the show moved on, and a new episode aired the next week. Across the ocean, the British networks looked at the episode and decided they could not run it. For 4 years, no one in the United Kingdom could see the Cartridge Family on regular television. The episode was effectively banned from the country that loved The Simpsons most outside of America. And the reason for the ban was not a single line of dialogue, or a single image, or a single joke. The reason was that less than 2 years before the episode was made, a real gun massacre had happened in a small town in Scotland, and the wound was still open. The plot of the episode begins with the Simpson family attending a soccer match in Springfield. The match itself is boring. The crowd grows restless. A small fight breaks out in the stands, then a bigger one. Then a full riot. Within minutes, the entire stadium is destroying itself. The riot pours out into the streets. Springfield falls into chaos. Homer, frightened that his home is no longer safe, goes looking for protection. He decides he needs a gun. The whole opening scene of the riot, the crowd losing control, the violence breaking out, was the first major problem for British censors. In the United Kingdom, soccer hooliganism was still a fresh memory. British football crowds had a long, painful history of riots, deaths, and disasters going back decades. The image of a crowd at a soccer match suddenly turning violent and tearing the city apart was not, for British viewers, just a comedy gag. It was something that had actually happened in real life, more than once, with real people dying. The riot itself was already enough to make some British networks nervous about the episode, but that was just the opening. What came next is what really sealed the episode's fate. Homer goes to a gun store. He fills out the paperwork. He waits the required 5 days. The song, The Waiting, by Tom Petty, plays as he sits, growing more impatient by the hour. The clerk at the gun shop runs through a checklist of background questions. Homer does not pass most of them. He has been arrested. He has been to a mental hospital. He is told he cannot buy a regular gun. But the clerk shrugs and says he can still sell Homer one anyway, just with a special label on it that marks it as official government issue. Homer takes the gun home. What follows is 20 straight minutes of Homer treating a real, working firearm like a toy. He waves it around the kitchen. He uses it as a bottle opener. He uses it as a TV remote. He shoots dinner plates as flying targets in the backyard with Bart. He fires bullets up at the roof to knock things down. He carries the gun into the corner shop. He takes it everywhere he goes. There is one specific scene where Homer points the loaded gun directly into Marge's face during a conversation, completely unaware of what he is doing. There is another scene where Bart finds the gun hidden in the fridge. Bart shows it to his friend Milhouse. They start playing a game where Bart aims the gun at Milhouse's head while Milhouse holds an apple in his mouth like a target. By the end of the episode, Homer has joined the local National Rifle Association chapter. The members of the chapter, in a small twist, end up being the responsible ones. They are horrified by Homer's behavior. They actually kick him out of the group for being too dangerous. Homer eventually realizes he cannot be trusted with the gun. He brings it to Marge and asks her to throw it away. Marge takes the gun outside to the trash. She lifts the lid, she looks down, and in the reflection on the metal can, she sees herself holding the weapon. She looks powerful. She looks confident. She looks, in her own quiet way, cool. She does not throw the gun away. She keeps it. The episode ends. That ending was the second major problem for British networks. The episode does not come out clearly against guns. It does not come out clearly for them either. The writers had purposely tried to make the episode balanced. Some of the show's writers were in favor of gun rights. Others, including Matt Groening himself, were strongly against guns. The writers compromised by making an episode that showed both the dangers of bad gun ownership and the appeal of being armed. The final scene, where Marge keeps the gun because it makes her feel strong, was meant to capture the way guns can pull people in even when they think they are above it. But to British censors, that ending sent the wrong message. It looked, from a certain angle, like the episode was telling viewers that owning a gun made you cool. The British censors had a specific reason to be worried about that message in 1997. On March 13, 1996, just over 19 months before the episode aired in America, a man had walked into a primary school in the town of Dunblane in Scotland. He was carrying 4 legally owned handguns. He went into the school gym. He opened fire on a class of 5- and 6-year-old children. He killed 16 of them. He killed their teacher. He then turned a gun on himself. The Dunblane Massacre was, at that point, the deadliest mass shooting in British history. It shook the country to its foundations. The British government responded by passing some of the strictest gun control laws anywhere in the world. The Firearms Amendment Act of 1997 banned almost all private ownership of handguns in the United Kingdom. The country had collectively decided that the answer to gun violence was simply to take the guns away. Into this exact moment in British history came an episode of an American cartoon where a buffoon father buys a handgun, treats it like a toy, points it at his wife's face, lets his 10-year-old son point it at another child's head, fires it into the air for fun, and then ends the story with his wife deciding the gun makes her look attractive. The British network that aired The Simpsons in 1997 was Sky One. Sky One looked at the episode and refused to broadcast it. The British Board of Film Classification, the body that decides what content can be shown on British screens, had a long-standing concern about scenes where guns were shown being used carelessly in ways that an impressionable viewer might want to copy. The Cartridge Family checked every box on that list of concerns. The riot was sensitive, the casual gun handling was sensitive, the pointing of the gun at a wife and a child, even played for comedy, was sensitive, the ending that seemed to glamorize gun ownership was sensitive, and all of this was being aired in a country that, less than 2 years earlier, had buried 16 of its smallest children because of the very same casualness about firearms. So Sky One pulled it. The episode was scheduled to be aired and then quietly removed from the lineup. British fans of The Simpsons could not see it on TV. The only way to watch the episode in Britain was to buy a special VHS release that came out called The Simpsons Too Hot for TV. The tape was a collection of episodes considered too edgy for British network airing, sold uncut and uncensored to fans who wanted to see the original versions. The Cartridge Family was on that tape. So British fans had to go and buy it on a specific tape if they wanted to see the episode their American counterparts had watched on regular TV. The ban lasted for around 4 years. In 2001, the British Broadcasting Corporation, better known as the BBC, finally aired the episode on its second channel, BBC Two. The BBC's policy at the time was usually to broadcast Simpsons episodes about 4 years after their American debut. The Cartridge Family fit that timeline. The BBC chose to run the episode uncut in an earlier evening time slot with no edits to any of the controversial content. This made The Cartridge Family the only episode of The Simpsons in the show's history to make its UK premiere on the BBC rather than on Sky. When Sky One finally got around to airing the episode itself in 2005, they did not air it the way the BBC had. Sky cut the ending. The scene where Marge looks into the trash can, sees her own reflection holding the gun, and decides to keep it, was removed entirely. The Sky version of the episode ends with Marge simply walking out of the motel where the family had been hiding, with no explanation for why she suddenly looked so confident. Viewers who watched only the Sky version were left with a confusing final scene that did not quite make sense. The whole point of the ending, which was that the gun's pull on people was strong enough to even change Marge, had been cut out. The British channel, Channel 4, which later took over the rights to broadcast The Simpsons in the UK, also aired the episode with the same cut. The ending was again removed. By cutting the moment where Marge keeps the gun, the British networks accidentally turned the episode into something simpler. The American version was a careful, balanced look at gun ownership, ending on an uncomfortable note. The British version became a clearer anti-gun story, with Marge throwing the gun away off-screen and the family moving on. The same episode told two slightly different stories in two different countries. The Cartridge Family also caught attention for one detail that did not get cut at all. There is a moment in the episode where the gun shop clerk asks Homer if he has ever been to a mental institution. The line is a callback to Stark Raving Dad, the season 3 episode where Homer was committed. By the time most modern viewers see the Cartridge Family today on Disney+, Stark Raving Dad has been removed from the catalog completely. So the line in the gun shop now refers to an event that, for new viewers, has effectively been erased. They hear the line and have no idea what episode it is pointing back to. The two banned episodes are linked through this small accident of history. What makes the British ban on the Cartridge Family so revealing is the timing. The episode was made by American writers in California, in a country where over 200 million guns were privately owned, where soccer riots were not really a thing, and where Dunblane had been a horrifying news story that quickly faded from headlines. The same episode arrived in Britain, where private handgun ownership had just been made illegal, where soccer riots were a permanent part of national memory, and where every parent of a young child had just watched a country grieve over Dunblane for months. The exact same 22 minutes of cartoon meant two completely different things in those two countries. The same yellow family, the same animated lines, the same recorded voices, played one way in one nation and another way in another. The American version was a debate. The British version was a wound being poked. The Cartridge Family is one of the cleanest examples in the show's history of how the geography of a viewer changes what a cartoon means. The writers in Los Angeles could not have known, while drawing Homer waving his pistol around the kitchen, that British 5-year-olds had been buried by their parents not 18 months earlier. The British networks could not pretend they did not know. So they pulled the episode and waited and edited and slowly let it back in over many years. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But the British were not the only ones to ban episodes for being too painful to watch in their cultural moment. Over in Japan, there were 2 specific episodes that the country simply refused to ever air at all. One of them was about a real medical disaster from the 1990s that had affected hundreds of Japanese children in a single afternoon. The other was about a disease that Japan had spent over a century mistreating its own citizens over, and only stopped doing so the year before the episode was made. Both episodes still cannot be shown there, decades later. And the second of those 2 cases involves Lisa pulling one of the meanest, smartest tricks she ever played on her family in a story that Japan found deeply painful for reasons most American viewers never even knew existed. Section 6, 30 Minutes Over Tokyo and Little Big Mom. The 2 episodes Japan will not air. There are over 780 episodes of The Simpsons in the show's full library. In Japan, 2 of them are missing. They have been missing for over 25 years. They were never shown on Japanese television. They are not in the Japanese DVD box sets. They are not on Japan's version of Disney Plus, and they will, almost certainly, never be allowed to air there. The 2 episodes were made 1 season apart. The first one is called 30 Minutes Over Tokyo. The second one is called Little Big Mom. One of them is set entirely in Japan. The other one does not mention Japan even once. But Japan banned both of them anyway, for completely different reasons that, when put side by side, tell a strange story about how a comedy show in California can stumble into pieces of another country's history without ever realizing it was doing so. The first episode aired in America on May 16, 1999. It was the season 10 finale. The plot, on paper, was a typical Simpsons travel story. The family loses all their savings to a hacker named Snake, who steals their bank details from a cyber cafe. Desperate to still go on vacation, they sign up for a special deal involving abandoned plane tickets at the airport. The tickets they end up grabbing fly them to Japan. So the family goes to Japan. The whole season 10 finale is the family wandering around Tokyo getting into trouble. The episode is full of jokes about Japanese culture. Some of them are gentle and observational. Homer keeps walking straight through the paper sliding doors at their hotel rather than opening them. The family marvels at a high-tech toilet that talks, plays music, and puts on a small fountain show. Homer becomes obsessed with the toilet. Bart and Homer eventually start dressing in traditional Japanese clothes and speaking the language fluently. The writers had clearly done research. Most of the Japanese spoken in the episode is genuinely accurate. The depictions of the city are detailed and warm in places. But there are 4 specific scenes that, altogether, became the reason the episode was banned in Japan. The first scene happens at a sumo wrestling match. Homer is at the match. He gets distracted. He stumbles into the center of the arena where the wrestlers fight. Standing there in the middle of the action is the actual Emperor of Japan. The Emperor at the time was a real person, a man named Akihito, who was the head of the Japanese imperial family from 1989 until 2019. The Simpsons drew a clear, recognizable cartoon version of him, in his traditional robes, watching the match in person. person. Homer sees him. Homer mistakes the Emperor for a sumo wrestler. He grabs the Emperor. He picks him up. And he throws the Emperor into a large container full of dirty sumo wrestler underwear. Then Homer raises his arms and shouts, declaring himself to be Emperor Clobbersaurus. The Emperor of Japan, in real Japanese culture, holds a sacred and protected position. There are very strict rules about how he is allowed to be shown in any kind of media. The Emperor's image is generally only allowed to appear in news coverage, in official educational books, or in formal historical works. Showing the Emperor in a comedy, or having him be the target of a joke, or showing any kind of physical attack on him, is considered a deep insult in Japanese culture. The Simpsons did all three at once. They put the Emperor in a comedy, they made him the target of the joke, and they had a fictional cartoon American throw him into a bin of soiled underwear. By the standards of Japanese broadcasting, that single scene alone was enough to make the episode unairable. The second scene happens earlier in the family's trip. Bart, Homer, and the rest of the Simpsons are sitting in front of a television in their hotel room. They turn on the TV and start watching a Japanese cartoon. The cartoon is called Battling Seizure Robots. It is a brightly colored robot show with rapid flashing lights. Within seconds of the cartoon coming on, every single member of the Simpson family collapses on the floor in violent shaking fits. The animation flashes faster and faster. The family convulses. The joke runs for several seconds before cutting away. That joke was about a real, painful event in recent Japanese television history. On December 16, 1997, less than 2 years before The Simpsons aired 30 Minutes Over Tokyo, a real Japanese cartoon had broadcast a real episode that did exactly what Battling Seizure Robots was made to copy. The cartoon was Pokémon. The episode was called Electric Soldier Porygon. There was a scene in the middle of that episode where the character Pikachu fired an electric attack, and the animators had used flashing red and blue lights to show the explosion. The flashes were too fast. They triggered a medical reaction in viewers known as photosensitive seizures. According to Japanese government records, 685 children across Japan were rushed to hospitals that night. 310 boys and 375 girls had to be treated for seizure activity, vomiting, and other symptoms. The Pokemon series was pulled off the air. The Electric Soldier Porygon episode was banned in every country, including Japan, and has never aired again. The Pokemon character Porygon, who is at the center of the incident, has never been allowed to appear as a main character in any future Pokemon episode. The Simpsons writers, working in California, decided to write a joke based on this exact event. They drew their own version of the seizure cartoon, called it Battling Seizure Robots, and made the Simpson family fall to the floor in fits while watching it. To American audiences, the joke was a quick, broad reference to a news story they had heard about. To Japanese audiences, the joke was about a real medical disaster that had hospitalized hundreds of their own children. The same gag landed completely differently in the two countries. The third problem scene was the Hello Kitty factory. The Simpsons take a quick tour of a factory where, the show implies, the famous Hello Kitty toys and products are made. The factory is shown in a way that, through the visual gag, suggests something deeply ugly about how the products might be created, in a way that some viewers could read as the cartoon making jokes at the cost of real cats. There were some early reports at the time that the founder of the company that owns Hello Kitty, an artist named Yuko Shimizu, had been upset by the scene. Years later, those reports were never properly confirmed, and they may have been invented or exaggerated, but the scene itself, regardless of the rumor, was considered another piece of cultural disrespect by Japanese reviewers. The fourth scene was the show within the show. Near the end of the episode, the Simpsons end up on a Japanese game show called the Happy Smile Super Challenge Family Wish Show. The show, in the cartoon, is a violent and cruel competition where contestants are punished for failing rather than rewarded for winning. Homer is tied to the top of the Tokyo Tower so he can be struck by lightning. The host blasts contestants in the face with hidden flamethrowers built into the microphone. The whole sequence was meant as a parody of Japanese game show culture, which had become a popular subject of mockery in American media at the time. To Japanese audiences, the scene played as another shallow joke about how strange and cruel their entertainment supposedly was. When the four scenes were added together, the Japanese broadcasting industry took one look at the episode and decided not to air it. The episode never made it onto Japanese television. The Japanese version of the Season 10 DVD box set was released without the episode included. When Disney Plus launched in Japan years later, with almost every Simpsons episode in its library, 30 Minutes Over Tokyo was one of the few that did not make the cut. Japanese fans of The Simpsons, even today, cannot easily find a legal way to watch the episode in their own country. The episode also faced a strange second ban. South Korea, which has its own long and painful history with Japan, refused to air the episode for a different reason. Korean broadcasters did not have a problem with how Japan was portrayed. The problem was that the episode was set in Japan at all. Korean networks, for many years after the show first aired, did not run any cartoons that dwelled on Japanese culture in the way 30 Minutes Over Tokyo did. The episode was eventually allowed to air in South Korea in 2007. If 30 Minutes Over Tokyo was banned for the obvious reasons of disrespecting a country directly, the second Japanese banned episode is much stranger. Little Big Mom aired on January 9th, 2000, just over 6 months after the Tokyo episode. It was the 10th episode of Season 11. It was, fittingly, the very first episode of The Simpsons to broadcast in the new millennium. The plot does not mention Japan a single time. The Simpsons never go to Japan in this episode. No Japanese characters appear. No reference to Japan is made. It is, on the surface, an episode about cleaning up the house. Marge breaks her leg in a skiing accident at the start of the episode. While she recovers in hospital, she leaves Lisa in charge of the family. Homer and Bart, who refuse to do any chores, let the house collapse into filth around them. Lisa, exhausted and ignored, asks the ghost of the famous American comedian Lucille Ball for advice. The ghost suggests that Lisa play a trick on Homer and Bart to scare them into helping. So Lisa waits until the two of them are asleep. She uses green poster paint and oatmeal to dab small fake spots all over their faces and bodies. When they wake up, she tells them they have caught a serious skin disease. The disease Lisa picks for the trick is leprosy. Leprosy is a real disease. It is bacterial. It causes skin damage and nerve damage if left untreated. In the modern world, it is curable and rare in developed countries. But for centuries, in many countries, people who caught leprosy were treated with deep cruelty by their own governments. They were forced into special, isolated communities. They were taken from their families. They lost their rights as citizens. The shame and fear around the disease lasted for hundreds of years. Japan had one of the longest and most painful histories of mistreating its own leprosy patients of any country in the world. Beginning in the early 1900s, the Japanese government passed laws that required all leprosy patients to be forcibly removed from their towns and placed into special isolation centers on remote islands and in distant regions. Patients were taken from their families against their will. They were sterilized so they could not have children. They were made to carry out heavy labor. They were not allowed to leave. The laws kept these people in forced isolation for nearly a century. The Japanese government did not repeal these laws until 1996. That was just 3 years before Little Big Mom aired in America. Around the time the episode was made, Japanese Japanese leprosy survivors and their families were in the middle of major lawsuits against their own government over decades of abuse. The wounds in Japanese culture were extremely fresh. To turn around at that exact moment and watch an American cartoon make leprosy into a joke, where a little girl tricks her father and brother into thinking they had caught the disease, where the disease was treated as a punchline, where the family ends up at a leprosy treatment colony in Hawaii as part of a comedy ending, was deeply painful. So Japanese broadcasters quietly chose not to air the episode. There was no big public announcement. The episode was simply skipped. It was left out of the Japanese DVD release. It was left off Japanese Disney Plus. It joined 30 Minutes Over Tokyo as the second of 2 missing Simpsons episodes in Japan. The American writers had no idea when they were drawing Lisa's prank with green paint and oatmeal that they were making a cartoon about a disease that had been at the center of a real Japanese national scandal less than 3 years earlier. They were just making a comedy. The country it landed in had a different history, and that history made the episode unwatchable. What ties the 2 banned episodes together is that, in both cases, the writers in California had no real connection to the pain they accidentally walked into. The Tokyo episode was an obvious target. The writers knew it was about Japan. They just did not understand how seriously certain things, like the Emperor or the seizure cartoon, would land. Little Big Mom was the opposite. The writers had no idea Japan was even part of the picture. Leprosy, to American writers, was a distant disease, mostly known from old Bible stories, with no recent cultural weight. To Japan, leprosy was a wound their own government had inflicted on its citizens for nearly 100 years. Both episodes are still missing from Japan today. Both still cannot be watched there through legal channels. Both will probably never be allowed to air on Japanese networks. The country has simply moved on, with 2 small holes in its Simpsons library that most fans there have never even noticed are missing. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But Japan was not the only major country in Asia where The Simpsons quietly disappeared from streaming services. There is another case, much more recent, involving a much bigger company that involves a single line of dialogue spoken by a character on a virtual exercise bike. That line, less than 10 seconds long, was enough to make Disney itself remove the episode from one of its streaming markets entirely. And the country that complained about the joke had spent the last decade trying to silence it everywhere else in the world too. Section 7, Goo Goo Gai Pan and One Angry Lisa, the 2 China bands Disney will not talk about. There are 2 episodes of The Simpsons that, in November 2021 and February 2023, simply vanished from one specific streaming service in one specific city. The streaming service was Disney Plus. The city was Hong Kong. The episodes were never officially banned by any government. There was no public press release. Disney did not announce the removal. The Hong Kong government did not put out a statement. The episodes just disappeared from the platform one day, and they never came back. The first one to vanish was a season 16 episode called Goo Goo Gai Pan. The second was a season 34 episode called One Angry Lisa. They were made 17 years apart. They were written by completely different teams. They have almost nothing in common except for one thing. Both episodes contain jokes that the Chinese government did not want anybody talking about. And once Disney decided it wanted to do business in China, both episodes had to quietly stop existing in the part of China that Disney could reach. The first episode, Goo Goo Gai Pan, aired in America on March 13th, 2005. It was the 12th episode of season 16. The plot followed Marge's sister Selma. Selma had been told by her doctor that she was going through menopause and could no longer have her own baby. She decided she wanted to adopt one. After a failed attempt to adopt one of Cletus's many local children in Springfield, Lisa suggested that Selma try to adopt a baby from China. Selma agreed. The whole family flew over to China to help with the adoption. The Chinese government, at the time the episode was made, had a rule that only married couples were allowed to adopt babies from the country. Selma was single, so she filled out the adoption paperwork using Homer's name as her fake husband. The family flew to China together. Selma pretended to be Homer's wife. Marge pretended to be the children's nanny. The adoption agent, a stern but funny woman named Madame Wu, voiced by the actress Lucy Liu, oversaw the whole process. The episode used the adoption story as the spine for a tour of the country, where the family visited Chinese landmarks and got into trouble in classic Simpsons fashion. The episode was, on its surface, no more rude than any other Simpsons travel episode. The family had done the same thing in Japan, in Brazil, in Australia, in England. But this episode contained two specific moments that turned it into something the Chinese government could not tolerate. The first moment came when the family visited the body of Mao Zedong. Mao was the founder and longtime leader of the Communist Party of China. His preserved body sits today in a large public memorial hall in Beijing, where millions of visitors file past it every year. In Chinese government messaging, Mao is treated as a hero, as the father of the modern country, as a figure of deep respect. In the episode, the Simpsons walk past his preserved body. Homer takes one look at him. Then Homer says, with a small smile, that Mao was a little angel who killed 50 million people. That single line, said in passing, was the kind of joke the Simpsons had always specialized in. The whole sentence flips between two ideas in a few seconds. Mao is called a little angel, the kind of phrase you use about a sweet child. Then the same sentence reveals that this little angel killed 50 million human beings. The number itself is not made up by the writers. Historians have long estimated that the various policies under Mao's rule, including a famine called the Great Leap Forward, led to tens of millions of deaths in China during the middle of the 20th century. The line was a real statement of historical fact, dressed up as a one-liner, and the Chinese government has spent decades trying to soften, hide, or push that history out of public memory. The second moment was much sharper. Later in the episode, Selma and the rest of the family pass through Tiananmen Square. Tiananmen Square is the most politically sensitive piece of public land in all of China. It is where, in the spring of 1989, hundreds of thousands of Chinese citizens, mostly students, gathered to protest peacefully for greater freedoms and reforms. After weeks of protest, the Chinese government sent in tanks and soldiers. Hundreds, possibly thousands of unarmed civilians were killed. The exact death toll has never been officially released by the Chinese government. The most famous image from those days was a single photograph of a man, his identity still unknown, who walked into the path of a moving line of tanks and stood completely still in front of them, holding his shopping bags. The world later called him Tank Man. He has come to stand for the entire massacre. The Chinese government, since the day the killings happened, has worked extremely hard to make sure the Tiananmen Square massacre is never publicly discussed in mainland China. Searches for the date are blocked online, photos are erased, documentaries are banned, books are pulled. Schools do not teach it. Public conversations about it can lead to arrest. The government's official position, repeated for decades, is that the events of 1989 either did not happen the way the world remembers, or that whatever did happen is simply not to be talked about. In Gugu Gai Pan, when Selma walks through Tiananmen Square, she passes a sign on a small post in the ground. The sign is meant to look like one of those small historic markers tourists see at famous places. But the words on the sign read, On this site, in 1989, nothing happened. That single sign, with that single sentence, is one of the sharpest jokes The Simpsons has ever made about a real political cover-up. The joke works because it does not deny the massacre. It quotes the Chinese government's position back at the audience, word for word. The government really has tried to insist nothing happened. The sign in Tiananmen Square in the cartoon is not invented satire. It is, almost word for word, the official line. Putting it on a small tourist plaque made the absurdity of the position visible. The episode then went one step further. Madame Wu, the adoption agent, ends up confronting Selma in Tiananmen Square. She arrives in a real Chinese army tank. Selma stands in front of the tank. The shot is drawn to almost exactly match the famous Tank Man photograph. Selma, a 40-something American woman trying to adopt a baby, takes the place of the unknown protester. The image was an unmistakable reference. Anyone who knew the photograph saw what the show was doing immediately. The writer of the episode, a man named Dana Gould, knew exactly how risky the script was. At the time the episode was being made, Dana Gould himself was, in real life, in the middle of trying to adopt a baby girl from China. He was worried that if his name was attached to a Simpsons episode that openly mocked the Chinese government, his real adoption could be stopped. So he asked the show to credit him under a fake name. The episode was officially credited to a writer named Lawrence Talbot. Many fans at the time thought a brand new Simpsons writer had joined the team. They had not. It was Gould, hiding his real name from the Chinese authorities so his own real-life adoption would go through. When the episode aired in America, China did exactly what was expected. The episode was banned from broadcast in China. Chinese television networks would not show it. The episode was not made available legally in the country. Hong Kong, which was officially part of China but had its own broadcasting freedoms, also blocked the episode. None of this was particularly surprising to anyone at the time. The Chinese government had been blocking foreign media that mentioned Tiananmen Square for decades. What was surprising, however, came nearly 17 years later. In November 2021, Disney launched its Disney Plus streaming service in Hong Kong. Disney owned The Simpsons by this point, having bought the show along with the rest of 20th Century Fox in 2019. When the service went live in Hong Kong, fans noticed that almost every Simpsons episode was there, ready to watch. There were over 700 of them, but Goo Goo Gai Pan was not one of them. The episode had been quietly left off the Hong Kong version of Disney Plus from day one. Disney never announced the decision. The episode was simply missing. This was a different kind of ban from the original 2005 one. The original had been the Chinese government refusing to let an American cartoon mock its history on Chinese broadcast television. The 2021 case was an American company, Disney, choosing on its own to remove an episode from a streaming service in Hong Kong. There was no public legal order. There was nothing forcing Disney to do this. The decision appeared to have come from inside the company itself. A Hong Kong Baptist University expert in film censorship named Kenny Ng commented publicly at the time. He said the removal looked like Disney choosing to take down anything that might cause problems for its business future in mainland China. Disney had already invested heavily in Chinese theme parks. Disney had ambitions to release more films in the Chinese market. An American company that wanted to do business in China could not have an old Simpsons episode making fun of Mao and Tiananmen Square sitting in their streaming library, even in Hong Kong, where technically the episode was allowed. The Hollywood Reporter, an American entertainment trade newspaper, made a sharp observation when the news broke. They pointed out that the episode in question, Goo Goo Gai Pan, had been making fun of exactly this kind of self-censorship. The episode was about how China had spent decades pretending Tiananmen Square never happened. And now, the episode itself was being made to disappear in a way that pretended it had never been there in the first place. The episode was suffering, in the words of one writer, exactly the kind of censorship it was written to ridicule. That was the first China-related Simpsons removal. The second one came less than 2 years later, and it was for a much shorter joke. The second episode is called One Angry Lisa. It aired in America on October 2nd, 2022. It is the second episode of the show's 34th season. The plot of the episode is mostly a domestic comedy. Homer buys Marge an exercise bike that lets her join virtual cycling classes from home. Marge becomes obsessed with a particular instructor, a charming, fit, strong-jawed man named Jesse, voiced by the longtime Simpsons performer Hank Azaria. Marge attends his classes every day. Homer gets jealous of Jesse. The episode builds toward Homer crashing into one of Marge's virtual classes for a fight. In one scene, Marge takes a private virtual ride with Jesse. Jesse selects China as their virtual cycling location. The screen behind them shows the Great Wall of China. As Marge begins her ride, Jesse turns to camera and delivers a single line of welcome. He says, "Behold the wonders of China." Bitcoin mines, forced labor camps where children make smartphones, and romance. That one line, less than 5 seconds of screen time, was enough to do what 50 Mao jokes from older episodes had not done. It got the episode pulled from Disney Plus in Hong Kong shortly after release. The line was making a real political reference. Western governments, journalists, and human rights groups have for years accused the Chinese government of running a network of forced labor camps in the western Xinjiang region of the country. The accusations focus on the Uyghur people, a Muslim minority group living in the area. According to many international reports, including ones from the United Nations, more than 1 million Uyghurs and other Muslim minority people have been held in detention centers where they are forced to work for little or no pay. Some of that work is reported to have included making electronic parts for products sold around the world, including smartphones. The Chinese government denies all of this. They say the centers are simply schools meant to teach job skills and the Chinese language. The international human rights community largely does not believe them. The Simpsons line about forced labor camps where children make smartphones was a direct reference to those reports. It was a quick, sharp joke. It also happened to be more or less factually defensible based on the available reporting. But the line was made in a year, 2022, when Chinese authorities had already cracked down hard on Hong Kong's previous freedoms. New national security laws had been passed in 2020 that gave the Chinese government broad power to crack down on speech in Hong Kong. The annual public memorial for the Tiananmen Square massacre, which had been held in Hong Kong every year for over 30 years, had been cancelled. Books were being removed from libraries. Films were being banned. When One Angry Lisa was scheduled for release on Disney Plus in early 2023, the line about forced labor camps was sitting right there in the script. The exact date and reason for the episode's removal from the Hong Kong service was never made public. By February 2023, the Financial Times broke the story that the episode had vanished from the Hong Kong version of Disney Plus. Other news outlets confirmed the disappearance. NBC News confirmed it. Reuters confirmed it. The episode was still available on Disney Plus in America. It was still on Hulu. But on the Hong Kong service, it was gone, with no announcement and no explanation. Disney refused to say what had happened. The Hong Kong government refused to say what had happened. The Chinese government refused to say what had happened. Kenny Ng, the same Hong Kong censorship expert who had commented on the Goo Goo Gai Pan removal in 2021, returned to the story in 2023. He said the same thing again. Disney, in his analysis, was self-censoring. The company had quietly decided that protecting its business future in mainland China was more important than keeping a cartoon line about labor camps in its Hong Kong library. What ties the two episodes together is the pattern. In 2005, the Chinese government banned Gugu Gaipan from its own broadcasts. In 2021, Disney itself preemptively pulled it from Hong Kong streaming. In 2022, One Angry Lisa aired in America. In 2023, Disney pulled that one too. The control of what people in Hong Kong could and could not see had moved over those 17 years from being something the Chinese government did to outside companies to being something American companies did to themselves before being asked. The line had moved. The Simpsons had not changed. The world the show was being broadcast into had simply tightened around it. The two episodes still exist. American viewers can still watch them. Most of the world can still watch them. But for fans living in Hong Kong, two specific Simpsons episodes are now permanently missing, removed by an American company that decided some of its older jokes were no longer worth the political risk of keeping them around. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There are other countries, however, where the bans were less about politics and more about a single substance or a single act of violence that the country in question simply did not want shown to its viewers, even on a cartoon. And there are two specific cases involving the same country, the United Kingdom, where the government's careful timing rules about what could be broadcast at what hour created a kind of soft ban that few American viewers would ever even know existed. One of those episodes involved Homer being attacked by birds. The other involved Bart being recruited by Sideshow Bob for something far darker than anything he had ever attempted before. Section 8, Weekend at Burnsies and Day of the Jackanapes, the UK Watershed Wars. The United Kingdom does not always ban a Simpsons episode in the way most other countries do. The British system, instead, has something called the watershed. The watershed is a strict rule that British broadcasters have to follow, written into the country's broadcasting code. It says that any content with adult themes, including drug references, sexual content, very strong language, or graphic violence, cannot be shown on television before the hour of 9 in the evening. Anything broadcast before 9 in the evening has to be safe for children. Anything broadcast after 9 in the evening can include heavier material, because the assumption is that most children are in bed by then. This rule does not exist in America. In America, networks set their own standards. Different shows air in different time slots. Some are aimed at kids, some at adults, but there is no single hard line at 9 p.m. In the United Kingdom, the watershed is the law. Broadcasters who break it can be fined heavily by the country's regulator. The rule has been in place for decades. It treats the hour of 9 p.m. like a wall. Before it, the airwaves are family safe. After it, they are not. The Simpsons in the United Kingdom has always been treated broadly as family programming. The show has aired in early evening time slots for years. It has been seen by millions of British children growing up. Most episodes have never had a problem with the watershed. The animation looks innocent. The jokes seem soft on the surface. British networks, including the BBC, Sky One, and Channel 4, have shown the show again and again at 6 in the evening, at 5 in the evening, sometimes earlier. Most episodes pass through with no trouble. But there are two episodes that broke this normal pattern. Both came from the early 2000s. One of them was about Homer being prescribed an illegal drug after a bird attack. The other was about Bart being turned into a child bomb. Both episodes ran into the watershed wall. Both got pushed past 9 p.m. One of them was simply pulled from British TV completely for a few years before being allowed back. Together, they represent a softer, slower kind of ban that few Simpsons fans outside Britain even know existed. The first of these episodes is called Weekend at Burnsies. It aired in America on April 7th, 2002. It is the 16th episode of Season 13. The plot starts with Marge planting a vegetable garden in the family's backyard. Crows arrive and start eating her seeds. Marge builds a scarecrow to scare them away. Homer, in a moment of typical Homer behavior, knocks the scarecrow down. The crows, who watched him do it, decide that Homer is now their new leader. They follow him everywhere. They obey his commands. They even kidnap baby Maggie at one point and try to deliver her to him as a present, dropping her from high in the air. She lands safely. Eventually, the crows turn on Homer. They peck at his eyes. He is rushed to the hospital. Dr. Hibbert puts stitches in his eyes and tells him he will be in serious pain for weeks. Then Dr. Hibbert hands Homer a prescription. The prescription is for medical marijuana. The state of Springfield, in this fictional cartoon world, has just made medical marijuana legal. Dr. Hibbert tells Homer that this is the best way to ease his eye pain. What follows is, by Simpsons standards, an unusually loose and open look at drug use. Homer takes the prescription home. He chooses between two different smoking devices at the pharmacy, picking what looks like a wizard-shaped one. He goes upstairs. He starts smoking. His family hears him singing the rock song "Smoke on the Water" through the closed bedroom door. Smoke billows down the stairs. Lisa sniffs the air and says it smells like the art teacher's office at her school. Marge is horrified at first, but Dr. Hibbert reminds her this is medical use, so she allows it. Homer then spends the rest of the episode in a permanent cheerful state. He sees rainbows everywhere, even when he cuts himself shaving. He becomes obsessed with food. He laughs at every single joke Mr. Burns tells, even though Burns's jokes are ancient and unfunny. Burns is so impressed by this that he promotes Homer to be his new vice president and personal speechwriter. Smithers, who was secretly hoping for the same job, becomes jealous. There is a scene where Homer drives his car while still affected by the drug. There is a small flashback gag involving a teenage Homer almost being arrested for marijuana, where a police sniffer dog bites him in the groin. The drug runs through almost every scene in the episode. The smoking is shown, the effects are shown, the character is shown enjoying it. In America, the network Fox had concerns about the episode, but they let it air with edits. The actual moments of Homer lighting up and inhaling were trimmed, so the smoking happens just out of frame. The American rating for the episode was originally TV-PG, the standard rating for The Simpsons. It was later raised to TV-14 because of the heavy drug content. In the United Kingdom, the response was different. The episode was, at first, simply not allowed to air. The UK's broadcasting rules at the time forbade content that showed drug use in a way that could be seen as encouraging or making it look attractive. Weekend at Burnsies clearly did this. Homer's experience with marijuana, for most of the episode, is fun. He is happy. His pain goes away. He gets a promotion at work. The drug is shown as solving his problems. The episode does include a section near the end where the people of Springfield vote to make medical marijuana illegal again, and Homer has to give it up. But by then, the audience has spent 20 minutes watching the drug make Homer's life better. British censors looked at the episode and decided it could not run on television. After a delay, a compromise was reached. The episode was eventually allowed to air, but only after the 9 p.m. watershed. Before 9 p.m., it was not allowed. The networks showing the episode were also banned from advertising it in their daytime promotions. No commercials promoting the episode could be shown to children during the day. The episode was treated, in the British system, like a piece of late-night content. Anyone who wanted to see it had to stay up after 9 in the evening to do so. The watershed restriction on Weekend at Burnsies has lasted for over 20 years. Even today on British television, the episode does not air in the show's normal early evening time slots. It only appears in late-night blocks. The DVD release of the episode in the UK was given a special rating of 12, meaning it was considered unsuitable for younger children. In Australia, which has a similar rating system, the episode received an even higher M rating, meaning it was considered mature audience material. This was only the second episode of The Simpsons in the show's history to receive that rating in Australia. It was an unusual classification for what the show normally was. The second episode in this section is called Day of the Jackanapes. It aired in America on February 18, 2001. It is the 13th episode of Season 12. It was written by Al Jean, the longtime showrunner of the show, and it brought back the popular villain Sideshow Bob for one of his recurring revenge plots against Bart and Krusty. On its own, the episode was nothing especially shocking by Simpson standards. It was a comedy, it had funny lines, it even reached an oddly emotional ending. But there was one specific plot element in the middle of the episode that, when the show arrived in the United Kingdom, ran into a new kind of problem. The plot of Day of the Jackanapes begins with Krusty the Clown announcing his retirement. He is sick of the network executives interfering with his show. During an interview, Krusty admits that he has erased every old tape of his show that ever featured Sideshow Bob, his former sidekick, and replaced them with reruns of a court show. Sideshow Bob, watching the interview from his prison cell, is enraged. He has now been completely erased from television history by the man who employed him for years. He plans his revenge. Bob gets parole again. He gets a job working as a janitor's assistant at Bart's school. One day he lures Bart out into a small shed on the playground. He ties Bart up. He hypnotizes him. He plants a trigger word in Bart's mind that will activate him later. Then Bob straps a bandolier of plastic explosives to Bart's chest. The plan is simple and dark. Krusty's farewell television special is happening that night. Bart, under hypnosis, will walk onto the stage during Krusty's emotional final speech, hug Krusty as a fan, and the explosives will go off. Bob will have killed both Krusty and Bart at once. This is the part of the episode that became a problem. Bart, a 10-year-old boy, is being weaponized by an adult man. The adult man straps real bombs to the child's body. The child is sent into a public space full of people on live television with the goal of detonating the bombs while embracing another character. The act, when stripped of the cartoon framing, is a description of a child suicide bombing. Even Sideshow Bob himself, in the episode, refers to it that way through the planning sequence. In February 2001, when the episode first aired in America, this premise played as dark comedy. The episode resolved the situation safely. Krusty, in his farewell speech, had a sudden change of heart and apologized on stage to Sideshow Bob. Bob, watching from the wings, was so moved by the apology that he tried to stop his own plan. Mr. Teeny, Krusty's pet monkey, swung in from above, grabbed the bombs off Bart's body, and threw them into the network executive's room, where they exploded harmlessly. Bart was unhurt, Krusty was unhurt. The episode ended with Krusty and Bob having dinner together. The whole thing was treated as a near miss in a classic Sideshow Bob plot. Then came September 11th, 2001. Then came the years that followed, where suicide bombings became one of the most familiar forms of terrorism in the world. Bombings in restaurants, bombings in markets, bombings carried out by people, sometimes very young people, who walked into crowded spaces wearing hidden explosives. The cultural meaning of a child with bombs strapped to his chest, walking onto a public stage to embrace another person, changed completely. completely. In the United Kingdom, where memories of older terror attacks were still fresh and where new fears were rising, the network looked at Day of the Jackanapes and made a decision. The episode would not be broadcast on regular British television. Even the show's normal late evening slot was considered too risky. The whole sequence of Bart being hypnotized, being strapped with explosives, and walking through a public crowd to detonate them was too close to real news stories that British viewers were watching every week. The episode was placed on a quiet hold. The hold lasted around 3 years. The British networks waited. In 2004, when enough time had passed and when the news cycle had moved slightly, the episode was finally allowed to air on UK television. By then, it had been quietly missing from rotation long enough that some fans had not even realized it existed. The official record kept by Simpsons fans tracking these things confirms the temporary ban. The episode was never officially banned by any government order. It was simply held back by the broadcasters themselves, in the same way many other shows of the era were quietly handled. What ties Weekend at Burnsies and Day of the Jackanapes together is the strange softness of the British system. Neither episode was ever officially declared illegal. Neither one was permanently buried. Neither one was struck from the show's library. Both were simply moved around. One was pushed past the 9 p.m. watershed and stripped of its daytime promotion. The other was quietly held off the air until the world calmed down enough to allow it to play again. This is a kind of ban that does not get the headlines that bigger ones do. There is no government statement. There is no lawsuit. There is no public apology. The episode simply does not show up where it normally would, and most viewers never know why. British broadcasting standards work this way on purpose. The system is built around the idea that certain content is fine, but only in certain places, at certain times, with certain warnings around it. The show is not removed, it is filed. Weekend at Burnsies, even now, sits in that filed state. It is not shown to children in the United Kingdom. It is not promoted during family hours. It is allowed to exist, but only in the late evening. Day of the Jackanapes returned to normal rotation eventually, but the 3-year hold on it became a small reminder of how much real-world news could change what a cartoon was allowed to be. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The British watershed bans were soft. They were not loud. But there are countries where bans on Simpsons episodes have been even quieter and stranger and harder to explain. 2 of these countries pulled episodes for reasons that, even today, the show's fans struggle to fully unpack. One of them was the entire continent of Latin America, all banding together to refuse to air an episode over a single line about a real 20th century leader. The other was a small European country that pulled an episode and then refused to publicly say why, leaving fans to guess at the real reason for years. Section 9. E pluribus vigum and a Maid Maggie, the Latin America and Czech Republic cases. There are 2 episodes of The Simpsons that were banned not for what most fans would expect. One was banned across nearly an entire continent because of a single sentence said by a minor character. The other was banned in a small European country, and to this day, the country has refused to publicly explain why. Both of these bans stand out as small, strange footnotes in the show's history, and both of them happened more recently than people think. The first one is called E pluribus vigum. It aired in America on January 6, 2008. It is the 10th episode of Season 19. It was written by Michael Price and directed by Michael Polcino. It featured the comedian Jon Stewart as a guest voice. The episode was nominated for a Writers Guild of America award in the animation category. By every American measure, it was a successful, well-made, well-received episode. The plot is a political comedy. Homer accidentally destroys the entire fast food district of Springfield by tossing a leaky battery and a lit match into a trash can outside a Krusty Burger. The whole boulevard catches fire and burns down. The town needs money to rebuild it fast. The mayor decides the only way to raise the money quickly is to move Springfield's voting day to the upcoming weekend, making Springfield the first town in the country to hold its part of the next presidential primary election. The whole national press shows up. Every candidate flies in. The Simpson family is hounded by reporters and politicians for days. By voting day, the town is sick of all the candidates. They meet in Moe's Tavern to complain. Homer suggests that everyone should just write in the most ridiculous person they can think of. Someone suggests Ralph Wiggum. Ralph Wiggum is the simple-minded 8-year-old son of Police Chief Wiggum, a recurring character known for saying random nonsense. The whole town agrees. They all write in Ralph. Ralph wins the Springfield primary. The national news goes wild. Both major political parties decide they want Ralph as their candidate. The episode ends with Ralph appearing in a campaign advertisement. The episode is a sharp piece of political satire. It plays fair. It mocks both major American parties equally. It treats voters as exhausted and fed up. The whole episode plays inside Springfield. It only takes one quick step outside the United States, and it is that single step that caused all the trouble. About halfway through the episode, the Springfield townspeople are venting at Moe's Tavern about the candidates running for president. The conversation gets heated. Two minor characters, Lenny and Carl, two co-workers of Homer at the nuclear power plant, throw out a thought during the complaints. Carl says, with frustration, that he could really go for some kind of military dictator. He suggests, by way of example, the late Argentine leader Juan Perón. Carl adds a line about how when Perón disappeared a person, that person stayed disappeared. Lenny then jokes back that yes, but also Perón had been married to the singer Madonna. The whole exchange takes about 6 seconds. That 6 seconds caused the episode to be pulled across most of Latin America for nearly a decade. To understand why, the line needs to be unpacked. Juan Perón was a real person. He was the president of Argentina at 3 different points in the 20th century. His wife, Eva Perón, was a beloved cultural figure in Argentina. After Eva's death, the singer Madonna had played her in a 1996 Hollywood movie called Evita. So when Lenny said Perón's wife was Madonna, he was confusing the actress for the actual person. To Argentines, this was an insult to the real Eva Perón, who is still considered a national heroine. The bigger problem was Carl's word choice. He called Perón a dictator and accused him of disappearing political opponents. The truth in real history is more complicated. Perón was actually elected 3 separate times in democratic votes. The mass forced disappearances of Argentine citizens, where left-wing critics of the government were kidnapped and killed in secret, mostly happened during a different period, the military dictatorship that ran Argentina from 1976 to 1983, which began nearly 2 years after Perón had already died. Some experts argue that the conditions for those disappearances were set during Perón's last term in office. But the basic claim that Perón himself had been a dictator who disappeared people was, by Argentine standards, historically wrong. The reaction in Argentina was loud. The clip went viral on the internet. It was viewed in Argentina more than 10,000 times within days. Politicians began publicly demanding the episode be banned. A former Argentine congressman named Lorenzo Pepe, who at the time ran an institute dedicated to honoring Perón's legacy, told the press the episode caused real harm because the disappearances in Argentina were still an open wound for many families. Pepe also added that the joke about Madonna was, in his view, even more disrespectful. The Argentine government's broadcasting committee actually rejected the official request to ban the episode, citing freedom of speech. But Fox Latin America did not need an order. The company decided on its own to simply not air the episode anywhere in its Latin American region. The decision affected most of South America, including Argentina, but excluded Colombia, Mexico, Chile, and Venezuela, which got the episode. Most of the continent's Spanish-speaking population could not watch the episode through normal channels for years. The episode finally returned to Latin American television on September 6, 2016, 8 years after it first aired in America. The political climate had shifted by then. The Kirchner political family, which had carried on the political tradition Perón started, had lost the Argentine presidency. Fox judged that the moment was right to bring the episode back. It aired in 2016 in a slightly cleaned-up version and uncensored a few years later. The second case in this section happened more recently and is much harder to explain. The episode is called A Maid Maggie. It aired in America on December 19, 2021. It is the 10th broadcast episode of Season 33. It was written by Elizabeth Kiernan Averick and directed by Timothy Bailey. It guest starred the actor Joe Mantegna, returning to voice the recurring Springfield Mafia boss, Fat Tony. The plot is a domestic story dressed up as a soft parody of the famous mafia movie, The Godfather. Marge realizes with horror that her baby Maggie has never been baptized. She wants Maggie to have a godfather. Ned Flanders is too busy. Mr. Burns refuses. Through a strange chain of accidents, Homer ends up asking Fat Tony to be Maggie's godfather, and Fat Tony agrees. The rest of the episode shows Fat Tony, the leader of the Springfield Mafia, turning into a doting godfather. He buys the Simpsons a new car. He gets Maggie into an elite preschool. He attends the baptism at the local church. He spends his Sundays in religious classes with Maggie. Fat Tony is shown as having genuine religious faith. The whole story builds toward a climax at an ice show, where rival mafia members try to assassinate Fat Tony, and Maggie is briefly placed in danger. By the end, the family is safe, and Fat Tony returns to his normal life. The episode is, by any standard, a soft and fairly gentle modern Simpsons episode. There is no graphic violence. The mafia themes are pure parody, repeated in many older episodes of the show before. The religious imagery is respectful. The Catholic baptism is shown in a serious, traditional way. Marge's worry about her baby's soul is treated with care. The Czech Republic banned the episode anyway. The Czech Republic, a small country in Central Europe, was the only country to ban A Maid Maggie. The episode was kept off Czech broadcasts and off the Czech version of Disney+. There was no public statement from the Czech government explaining the ban. There was no press conference. The Czech broadcasting authorities simply refused to comment when asked. The episode quietly disappeared from the country. Different sources have given different theories for what triggered the Czech ban. The most commonly cited reason from the Wiki Simpsons reference page is that the episode contained heavy themes surrounding Christianity. The Catholic baptism scene is shown in detail. There is a long sequence where Fat Tony teaches Maggie about the Virgin Mary and various Catholic saints, with parts of his speech actually performed in Italian. Marge has a nightmare about Maggie burning in hell forever for being unbaptized. The Czech Republic is one of the most non-religious countries in Europe, and Czech broadcasting standards are sometimes strict about religious content shown in cartoons aimed at children. A different theory, listed on other reference pages, is that the episode was banned over its organized crime theme. Fat Tony being shown as a positive father figure, providing for the family with what was clearly mafia money, may have been seen as making organized crime look attractive. The most surprising part of the case is the silence. To this day, no Czech official body has explained the choice publicly. The episode was simply removed. Fans tracking these things have been left to guess at the real reason for years. It joined a small group of Simpsons episodes that exist everywhere except in one specific country, with no explanation given. Both E Pluribus Wigum and A Maid Maggie show how, even after 30 years of the show being on the air, individual countries can still pull individual episodes for reasons that, to outsiders, seem small. A throwaway line by a minor character about a long-dead foreign president was enough to keep one episode out of half a continent for nearly a decade. A baby's baptism sequence, or a mafia boss being kind, was enough to make another episode quietly vanish from one country in Central Europe. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The strangest bands in the show's entire history, however, have nothing to do with politics or religion at all. There are bands that came down because of a particular pencil color used in animation. There are bands that came down because of a Halloween special being too violent for one country and not for another. And there is one band that, more than any other case in the show's history, captures just how absurd the whole idea of banning a cartoon can be. It involves a country in Asia, a movie made for the big screen, and a color palette so politically charged that the whole film was banned for being too yellow. Section 10. Treehouse of Horror 27, Treehouse of Horror 28, and The Simpsons movie. Banned in Myanmar, The Strange Cases. Some of the bans on The Simpsons over the years have happened for serious reasons. Real political wounds, real medical disasters, real laws written after real wars. But there is another, smaller category of bans that exists for reasons so strange that even years later, they read more like jokes than real news stories. These are the bans that happened over a Halloween special being too violent, over a single segment about cannibalism, and over a color palette that happened to match the wrong political party's flag. These three cases form the strangest corner of the show's banned episodes history. The first one is Treehouse of Horror 27. It aired in America on October 16, 2016. It was the fourth episode of season 28. It was also a milestone, the 600th episode of The Simpsons in the show's history. The episode was written by Joel H. Cohen and directed by Stephen Dean Moore. It featured the comedian Drew Carey, the musician Donald Fagen, the actress Sarah Silverman, and the longtime returning villain Sideshow Bob, voiced again by Kelsey Grammer. The episode was, even by the standards of the Treehouse of Horror line, an unusually dark one. The Treehouse of Horror specials are the show's annual Halloween episodes. They are anthologies with 3 short horror or science fiction stories told inside 1 half hour. They have always been more violent than regular Simpsons episodes. Characters are allowed to die in them. Rules are broken. The show's normal continuity is suspended, but Treehouse of Horror 27 pushed even those loose rules harder than usual. 2 of the 3 segments featured graphic scenes involving children being killed. The first segment, called Dry Hard, was a parody of the Hunger Games. Springfield was running out of water. Mr. Burns staged a brutal contest where the town's children fought each other to win the last clean water supply. Several children, all named characters from the show, were killed during the contest. The second segment, called Buff Fripp, centered on Lisa, who became increasingly suspicious that her best friends were dying off in mysterious accidents. The deaths in that segment were also graphic, also involving young characters, also presented as comedy. When the episode was scheduled to be broadcast in Japan, the Japanese network looked at it and decided it could not air. The official reason given by a network spokesperson was that the violent scenes involving children were not acceptable for Japanese broadcast standards. Japan, by this point, had already become the country that had refused to air more Simpsons episodes than almost any other. Treehouse of Horror 27 joined 30 Minutes Over Tokyo Tokyo and Little Big Mom on the list of episodes Japan would simply not show. The reaction in New Zealand was even more surprising. The New Zealand network, TVNZ, which carried the show, was scheduled to broadcast Treehouse of Horror 27 as the milestone 600th episode. Instead, the network skipped it entirely. They aired episode 599, then went straight to episode 601. The 600th episode, which was supposed to be a celebration of the show reaching that landmark, simply did not air at all. Fans noticed. They asked why. At first, the network suggested the episode had been moved around because of its Halloween timing. A spokesperson later confirmed that the real reason was the violent content. The episode was eventually allowed to air in New Zealand, but only in a late-night time slot, well after the country's own watershed. The United Kingdom did the same. 1 year later, almost to the day, The Simpsons aired the next year's Halloween special. It was called Treehouse of Horror 28. It aired in America on October 22, 2017. It was the fourth episode of season 29. It was directed by Timothy Bailey and written by John Frink. The episode contained 3 segments. The first was a parody of the horror film The Exorcist, with Maggie possessed by an ancient demon. The second was a parody of the dark children's movie Coraline, with Lisa entering an alternate dimension where her family had buttons sewn over their eyes. The third segment, called Homer, became the most controversial part of the entire special. In Homer, the family goes on holiday. Homer stays home alone. Within days, he eats every piece of food in the house. He is left with nothing but vegetables, which he refuses to touch. He finds a single frozen hot dog. While trying to grill it, he accidentally cuts off one of his own fingers. The finger falls onto the hot grill. Homer, curious, eats it. He discovers, to his shock, that he tastes good. From that point on, the segment becomes a long, slow, increasingly disturbing sequence where Homer cannibalizes himself, piece by piece, in creative cooking ways. He uses his own forehead skin as cheese. He grinds his own brain through a hole in his ear and uses the fluid as casserole sauce. He pulls out his own teeth and uses them as cherries on top of cupcakes. By the time his family returns from their trip, Homer is missing the lower half of his body. The famous American chef Mario Batali, voicing himself, eventually convinces Homer to sell the rest of his body to fancy restaurants in Springfield. The whole town starts eating Homer. The segment ends with Homer in heaven, comparing notes with Jesus about what it feels like to have everyone eat your body. The cannibalism segment was so graphic that the show actually had Lisa step out from the curtain at the start of the segment to give a content warning to viewers. She told the audience the segment was so disgusting they might want to watch the violent fantasy show Game of Thrones afterwards just to calm down. This kind of content warning was something the show had not really used since the very earliest Treehouse of Horror specials decades earlier. When the episode was scheduled to air in Italy, the Italian broadcaster looked at the cannibalism segment and refused to broadcast the episode. Italy is, like most European countries, a place with strict broadcasting standards about graphic content. The Homer segment was simply too explicit. The episode was kept off Italian television entirely. The ban lasted for a full 2 years. The episode was not added to the Italian version of Disney Plus until 2020. It was not finally allowed to air on Italian regular television until 2021, 4 full years after it had first aired in America. Australia's 7mate channel also refused to air the episode for the same reason. These 2 Halloween episodes, taken together, marked something new for the show. Earlier bans had been about politics, religion, or culture. These bans were about pure shock value. The writers had pushed the violence in the Treehouse of Horror specials harder and harder over the years. Eventually, they pushed it past the point where certain countries' broadcasters were willing to show it. But the strangest ban in The Simpsons' entire history is not about content at all. It is about color. In 2007, 20th Century Fox released The Simpsons movie. It was the first feature-length film based on the show. It had taken nearly 2 decades to make. The plot was simple. Homer accidentally pollutes the lake in Springfield so badly that the entire town is sealed inside a giant glass dome by the United States government. The family escapes and tries to save the town from being destroyed. The film made over $500 million worldwide. It was released in almost every country on Earth. Almost every country. In Myanmar, also known as Burma, the film was banned outright. Not edited, not delayed, not pulled from streaming. Banned completely from being shown in the country at all. The reason, when it became public, was almost impossible to believe. The country's official motion picture and video censor board had at that time banned the use of 2 specific colors in any film shown to the Myanmar public. The 2 banned colors were yellow and red. The reason traced back to local politics. Myanmar in 2007 was ruled by a strict military government, also called a junta. The military had taken over the country years earlier and refused to give up power. The largest opposition group fighting them was a peaceful pro-democracy movement called the National League for Democracy. The party's official flag was a yellow peacock on a deep red background. Yellow and red, together, had become the color combination of the resistance movement against the government. Citizens wearing yellow and red in public could be arrested. Posters in those colors could be torn down. Films featuring those colors could be banned. The Simpsons movie was, of course, an animated movie about a family of yellow people. Lisa Simpson throughout the film wore a bright red dress. Bart throughout the film wore a red shirt. The entire town of Springfield was painted in those 2 colors over and over. To the Myanmar censorship board, the film looked like a feature-length political advertisement for the opposition party. There was no way for the film to be shown to local audiences without the yellow and red of the rebel flag flashing across the screen for almost every minute of the runtime. So the censors did the only thing their rules allowed. They banned the film completely. The ban was widely reported. Western news outlets at the time picked up the story as one of the most absurd movie bans of the year. The Myanmar government refused to officially confirm or deny the reasoning to international press, in keeping with the country's broader pattern of keeping its decisions opaque. Burma had by then already become known for making national rules based on superstition. The country had, in the late 1980s, briefly insisted that all paper money had to be printed in numbers divisible by 9, ruining the savings of many citizens overnight. Banning 2 colors from cinema fit a long pattern of unusual top-down decisions. The cruel irony of the ban is that the National League for Democracy eventually won. The party would go on to take power in a free election in 2015. The military, however, staged a coup in 2021 and seized control again, jailing many of the party's leaders. The yellow and red flag the Myanmar government had once been so afraid of, the flag that had cost the Simpsons movie an entire country's worth of audience, has remained one of the most powerful political symbols in modern Asian history. What ties these 3 cases together is how small and strange they all are. A Halloween episode kept off Japanese TV because 2 child characters die in the wrong way. A cannibalism segment kept off Italian TV for 2 years over how it shows Homer cooking himself. A whole feature film banned by an entire country because of the color of a cartoon family's skin. None of these bans came from any kind of grand political offense. They came from animation choices, from comedy choices, from color choices that happened to land in countries where those exact things, at that exact moment, were treated as serious matters. The show that began on Fox in December 1989 has now been on the air for over 36 years. In that time, it has aired more than 780 episodes. 11 of them have been banned somewhere in the world. Some were pulled by governments. Some were pulled by the show's own producers. Some were pulled by streaming services trying to stay friendly with foreign markets. Some vanished after a tragedy. Some vanished after an apology that made things worse. Some, like the movie banned in Myanmar, were simply too yellow to exist. But the story of The Simpsons and the countries that have refused to show it is not really about cartoons. It is about the strange, fragile relationship between an American comedy and the rest of the world that has been watching it for decades. Every banned episode is a small history lesson. Every removed scene is a record of what some part of the world, at some point in time, decided was too painful, too political, or too dangerous to show. The show kept making them anyway. Some made it onto every screen, some did not. The ones that did not are the quiet shadows behind one of the most watched television series in human history. And somewhere, in a country, in a household, on a screen, every single one of them is still being missed by someone who never even knew they were gone. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.